Trauma is a part of life, right? You know, you can't live life without trauma, unfortunately. For me, trauma has been the trauma that's more devastating than anything for anybody's life, which is sickness and death of a family member, of a close family member. And so I in those moments, what has been helpful to me? Dialogue with God through prayer, but also dialogue with others, right? That you feel confident, that you trust, that could listen to you non-judgmentally, that could listen to your anger, actually even your anger towards God. You know, the prophets many times expressed in their trauma anger towards God, not in a putting a God down, but actually in a relationship that's so trusting and so loving that you could actually be totally honest with God, because at the end, God knows your heart anyway, right? It's that Psalm 139, right? Lord, where can I hide from you, right? You know my thoughts from afar. So that dialogue between the Lord and us, but also between us and the people that are important, that God has placed as companions in our life. So talking things out over time brings a great amount of healing. The reality is sometimes you don't find meaning, right? At least when you're going through it. Right? If that was the case, it wouldn't be a trauma at all. It would be like, oh, this is just a step on the way, and I understand it perfectly. But the fact is that we don't understand it perfectly. Even Christ on the cross, or Christ in Gethsemane, right? You know, he said to the Lord as he's approaching that trauma, he knows what's coming down the pike. He knew what was coming down the pike. And he actually turns to his Father and says, is there any way? Is there any way that this cup could pass? And at the end he says, I might not totally get it and understand it, but let your will be done. Because I trust that. I trust that. So I wish I could say that when we're going through trauma, that it will all make sense at that time. It might make sense in hindsight. In hindsight, at least for myself, many of the hard times made sense, but later. And I saw then God's hand in what happened. But I can't honestly say that I saw God's hand sometimes while it was happening. I can't honestly say that. I would be lying if I said that, because you don't see God's hand sometimes. It's there, and that's the trust and the hope part of it, right? That you trust and you hope that, yes, it is there, right? That's why we live by faith, And so that's the tough part of that, right? Trauma is not easy. Part of life, can't evade it, comes and goes, right? What's powerful about our faith is that we believe and we hope and we trust that even embedded in the trauma is God's providence. Hope is that which helps you navigate, right? It helps you navigate. Hope is what helps us to see that somehow, in some way, all things work for the good of those who love God. That was Paul, right? He didn't say, oh, you'll understand it all. Why did he say that? Because he himself was going through his own trauma, and he himself was going through his own moments, being jailed, and sometimes there are situations that we can't get out of ourselves, right? So Peter gets jailed, right? It took an angel. It took God's intervention. Peter wanted to very much probably be outside of that trauma, right? But he couldn't do it on his own. God had to open those doors for Peter to come out. And he came out stronger, and he came out more convicted than ever, and he came out from there, and he went right out to preach the word. He got into dialogue, right away. But Peter couldn't do it on his own. He didn't have the key. He didn't have the key to that trauma spot to get out. Grace. That's where grace comes in, and that's where hope comes in, right? That we believe that God is love. This is a traumatic time for the world, as we're witnessing in Ukraine with hundreds of thousands of people, young people, kids dying every day. And you do question, how could this be allowed? How could this be permitted? How does God make this happen? The fact is that God can't control, right, the actions of people, because he didn't make us as robots, right? But he does control the outcome at the end, right? In the same way that that God the Father could not control the fact that his son was arrested, tortured, and executed, but he did control the end of the story. And he said that even when it came to that very end, it wasn't actually the end. And the people that put him to death thought it was the end. But from God's heart and mind, it was only the beginning.